Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
It sounds like you got your voice back.
Yeah, it's amazing what happens when the microphone actually works, isn't it?
Well, still no video, but
yeah. Well, that's doing you a favor.
I was going to say, we
no
always
complaints.
Said you've always had a face for radio.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to complain about that one.
Well, yeah. We may pick up some YouTube subscribers now.
There you go. What Brandon's referring to for our listeners is that you will hear in this audio portion of this podcast tonight with our guest, Sean O'Neill, who we'll talk a little bit more about Sean in a second. But my video went out, but just so it didn't feel left out, my audio decided to join it. And so you'll hear there's a couple of different moments. One, if you all of a sudden hear Sean or Brandon or myself just stop in the middle of a sentence, and then we pick up maybe a couple seconds after that, thanks to Brandon's quick thinking, you'll understand why that is. But really good. It's interesting. It's probably a little bit apropos. Yeah, right? Ironic. I couldn't thank you. I could not think of whatever word I was trying to come up with there. But that Sean O'Neill is our guest tonight. So Sean's the founder of One Performance. He's a mental performance coach, but also he's a teacher, and he's been a teacher for quite a while now. And he's up in the New York area, and Sean is going to share with us a little bit about some of the challenges that the teachers have been facing this year, and how really a cool thing is that, as he'll mention, is how probably timely it was that he had gotten as involved with mental performance coaching as he had just prior to COVID, because he's actually had to share some of those, not only with the students, but some of those skills in systems and strategies with the teachers as well. Absolutely.
It's a great interview, and he's a very, very entertaining guy, and I think the listeners are going to enjoy it.
And a good sport, because he didn't miss a beat when there's just like total chaos going on around him, videos dropping, me sounding like I'm in a tunnel somewhere, and then me texting Brandon throughout the whole interview, like, "Hey, I can't get on." So I think we'll have to give hats off to Sean and definitely have him back sometime too, where hopefully it's a little bit less distracting, but still came through with a really great interview, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So we want to welcome to the show Sean O'Neill, and I've known Sean for a good while now, actually. Sean is the founder of One Performance. He's got a unique background in the fact that Sean's not only a mental performance coach. We actually went through the mental performance mastery program of Brian Cain's together. That's how I met Sean. But he's also a school teacher, and today I think we're going to really dig into some of those things that he's been able to utilize, some of the systems and the strategies he's been able to utilize with the school students and quite frankly, with some of his fellow faculty, because, I mean, Lord knows this has been one of those years for teachers and educators. I have a wife that's in that system as well, Sean, and I can only imagine what that's been, but we'll definitely get into that. But we want to welcome you to the show, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Sean. Excited to do this.
Absolutely. So we want to, first of all, what we like to do is kind of get to know you a little bit more and your story, and just maybe, if you would, what kind of started you on that journey towards teaching and coaching? And then we'll get into, after we find out about that, we'll get into what it was that made you start thinking about the mental game and how important that was going to be.
Gotcha. My story is very much like a lot of the guests that you've had on. I'm a baseball guy. So I was just starting teaching, and one of the coaches was like, I'd love to have you come down and volunteer. And I volunteered for 8 years, and then I became a varsity coach. And then I was going back to school, so I became a college coach for a little bit. So I kind of went through a lot of that coaching, and in baseball is such. It's amazing. We look at it as such a mental game, but we don't really work at it as a mental game. We're very much physical and throwing and hitting and base running and stuff like that. But the actual mental approach was lacking. So I kind of almost was forced into it. I was working with a team, and one of the coaches brought me in, and he said, you work with crazy kids. We got one for you. And I worked with this young man, and I was literally, I remember going to the bookstore and trying to find anything about the mental game of baseball. And there was Heads Up Baseball. And I remember almost going week by week with this kid, chapter by chapter. And that kind of got me into it. And then I dabbled in it, and I would kind of read books on it. And then as my teaching career progressed, I noticed that the students that were coming up were missing a lot of the basic performance skills. They had a lot of anxiety over things that they really shouldn't have. The routines weren't there. The fixed mindset, that was tremendous. So I went, and as you said, I went through the Brian Cain certification. And then from there, it kind of just kept going. Once you're around like-minded people that just want to keep learning, it just keeps going and going and going. And it's been a really cool experience the last 2 or 3 years. I would say that this year for teachers has been stressful. And if it wasn't for my mental performance background, I don't know how I would have survived it, to be completely honest.
Yeah, it's interesting. I heard you mention this the other day on another call that you and I were on, where you were talking about that. And I thought that was a really key component, was just how important this has played a role with what you've had going on this year. So how receptive have the students and the teachers been as it relates to that?
The students are great with it. Because I teach biology, so we kind of like, all right, we're not going to do biology for a few minutes, and they're like, yes, and we're going to do some mindset stuff. And one of the things this year that I really have been trying to drive home with them is they all have the ability. They just need the strategies, and that's where I come in. And some of the kids are like, I don't want to do any of this. And then there are others that are just like, wow. I actually just received a letter from this year's valedictorian who I had 3 years ago, right kind of when I was starting the Brian Cain stuff. And I remember talking to them about, we don't set goals, we go on missions. And the idea of, goals, unless you're very specific and detailed with them, you can kind of fuddle through them and maybe get it. But when you have a mission, it's a focused purpose. And this student, when she was leaving in my classroom in 9th grade, she wrote me a little note and said, I have my mission now. And then just a week ago, I got an email from her saying, mission completed, I'm the valedictorian.
Wow, that is awesome.
And that, that wasn't, it was just, she needed someone to put her in the mindset to do that. So that's where I'm really focusing growth mindset, understanding the difficulty in learning. That's one of those things that a lot of kids think that school is supposed to be easy. It's not. Nothing worth doing is really easy. So we work a lot on that mindset. We talk about failure as feedback. I'm probably one of the only teachers you'll ever meet that goes, all right, you failed a test. Great. We got some good information coming from it. And even test anxiety, the shift of going from I'm nervous to I'm excited. I'm nervous about failing to I'm excited about performing. Just those little things, and a lot of them are picking it up, which is really neat to see.
So I'm curious how, and I don't want to get too far down the path because I know it can be a touchy subject, but in terms of administration in the school and things like that, are you getting embraced? John and I talk about this a good bit about mental health is starting to become something that is more embraced in the school systems and stuff like that, but you still have to be kind of careful. Are you getting embraced within the school system and or specifically within your administration?
So one of the fine lines we walk is between mental health and mental performance, and that's a line that I'm very aware of. Because we have school counselors and psychologists and things like that. And I don't ever want to go down a path that I'm not really certified or trained in. But the administration has actually been on board with it, because with social emotional learning as being kind of a big idea, they've been on board with it. We have a school advisory that I helped develop some programs for them. So every month the kids get a little bit of mental performance training. And there's been some pretty good feedback with that. Our athletic director, during COVID, I kind of reached out to him. He was a brand new guy. They just hired him. And I said, listen, I do mental performance. If you'd like to, I'll set up a program on our Teams page. We use Microsoft Teams for all of it. I'll set up a series of videos that go through mental performance that every team can have access to. And he was beyond on board with it. Now it's just trying to get coaches on board with it. Sure. Because they're kind of like, what's mental performance?
Right.
So with anything, it's you have some that are gun ho, and then others that are kind of in that wait and see, let someone else's program go through it, and we'll see. But overall, I would say that there is a positive support for it. Yeah. Yeah.
It makes sense. What Kane always said was it's good for others, right? Maybe I'll give it a shot. Maybe I'll try it, and then finally you reach that point where you're like, I can't believe I did it any other way. So it makes sense that some of those people are doing that. What's the awareness level been like as it relates to all of the teachers and students, as far as, do you feel like when you're coming to talk to them about these things, that they are that self-awareness, that they, at least, especially the adults, the students may have a harder time, but that the adults are at least aware that these are challenges going on from a mental aspect?
It really depends on the culture of the group that I'm with. Some groups are more accepting of professional development and something new, while others are kind of like, this is something we got to sit through for 30 minutes. So, but I'd say with every group that I've worked with, I've had those people come up to me afterwards and say, I'd like to know more about this.
Yeah.
So, no one's ever just like, standing ovation, this is the best thing ever. But a lot of people have said, and what's been interesting is people have noticed it in me and in my demeanor and my approach to things. This has changed me. This has changed the way I react to certain situations, and my motivation and my commitment. Absolutely, you have to live it before you can teach it.
Well, absolutely. And let me ask you this question: how are you finding? That? Let me ask you this a little bit of a different way. So what do you think is one of those? What's probably the most misunderstood challenges that's going on right now as far as educators go in this virtual learning environment, or in some cases maybe a hybrid situation, that those of our listeners might be able to be like, oh, okay, I didn't think about that, or maybe I didn't understand that's the challenge for the teachers?
Probably the one is the present moment focus. Like our computers break down, we lose the internet. It's bizarre, and sometimes we'll be teaching. Like, I have students in person with me, but they're also remotely with me. So there's a lot of chaos behind the scenes that if you let it get to you, it will drive you absolutely crazy. But if you can just focus on that moment, you have a better chance of getting through it all.
No, that makes sense.
So, interesting question. So, if people have noticed in you, what do you think the biggest change has been in you since you've adopted and started, kind of practicing what you preach?
The awareness of my own responses to things. I find myself pausing now, and where there used to be something that would get me very frustrated, now I kind of change my mind towards it as like it's not an attack, it's not anything I did. It's I'm aware. I'm not letting myself get pulled in. I'm more fascinated by it, and why, and then why is that response the way it is, and and there's an old saying, not my circus, not my monkeys.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if someone's having a day, you're there for them, but I instead of trying to solve all of their problems, I'm just trying to help them become aware of how they're feeling about the problem.
Yeah, and finding out
That's
why.
Very cool.
I mean, that was one of the things that we talked about on the last episode was, when we were harder on, was the importance of digging a little bit deeper and finding out why is it, what maybe there's some underlying thing going on with this particular student or teacher that's causing some of that.
Yeah.
So
most definitely. And
I was just going to say is, so what do you think about from a pain point standpoint? Are you seeing where that there's common pain points between students and teachers alike? I mean, is it always, you mentioned nervousness and excitement and anxiety and some of those things earlier, and I know you and I, one of the things I want you to talk about here in a little bit is that confidence, right? Is how important that is. And then also the confidence resume, because I think that's something that you talk about a lot. That's a really cool thing. But talk to us a little bit about those pain points for the students and teachers.
I'd say the biggest pain point for everyone, not just in education, was the sense of loss. We all lost something. We lost time with our students. We didn't get the end of the year with them. We didn't, one of the really cool things in education is, where you're starting, and then you see that growth, and that was kind of pulled away from us. And then just in general, the everyday loss of not being able to see a smile. Like that's a tremendous asset to teachers, and smiling and joking, and even high fives and fist pumps, and for the elementary, the hugs and the social distancing, and as adults, we're hopefully a little bit better at handling it, but now we really got to focus on the students, and how, because they don't have that skill set of being resilient, and we have to build that up. I was listening to Tyler Pasek today talking about being anti-fragile. These kids are resilient. We just gotta keep going with them, and it's different. It's very different. And I've had students say, I just wish my friend could be here. Like, I have a class this year that is so amazingly special, and the two groups will never meet. And that's one of those things that I'm like, I wish I could just get them all in one place at one time, so they could kind of just gel with each other. So I've had students that have lost multiple family members, and that component of building resilience with them has it's at times that's all we're doing, which is great. I hear people on the news saying, the kids, they're losing so much academically. These kids are becoming computer experts.
Right. Right.
They'll have a skill set that I didn't have last year. Right. My 7-year-old, it flies through these things. Like, I've asked her, like, how do you do this?
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you start this process, and maybe this should be phrased a different way, but you talk about having two separate classes or opportunities there. Are you guys seeing, Sean, at any point that those two classes will be able to get back together in the near future? I mean, is that something that you think will happen?
I don't honestly see it happening in the building where I work. We have over 1,300 students in one grade.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, like on a day now, we have 500 students in the building.
Okay.
So I don't see them this year being all together.
Okay.
But hopefully in the future.
So as maybe a tangent to that, the sports teams at the school, how are they managing that, and how do you manage it? I'm assuming that they kind of get put into a pod all together. Is that how they handle it?
So we have in New York what's called abbreviated seasons. So we're actually right now halfway through our fall sports season. So okay. It's football season right now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So what they did with all the fall sports is they only have 5 games. The football only has 5 games. Okay. And then they'll have like 1 or 2 rounds of the playoffs. It's a much more condensed format. We went through winter sports. Mm-hmm. That went from December to January.
Okay.
So, and there was no playoffs, none of that. Okay. Fall sports are now. Okay. And then spring sports actually start in May.
Oh, okay.
And they'll go for 6 weeks. So okay. like the baseball team that I work with, yeah. Their season is May and June, which is usually we start March 1st is spring okay. sports. So I was joking with the football coaches, like, I'll give you guys some tips on how to deal with the weather, because they're used to, shorts and t-shirts and right. stuff like that. They're not used to, 27 degrees and being outside and it's windy. And
man. Well, and but even from utilizing that from a mental aspect is, teaching them a little grit, right? A little
Absolutely.
adversity, taking that as an opportunity.
Yeah.
One thing that we haven't had an opportunity to talk about before, which I'm kind of interested in, is with your exposure to the baseball team in general, or specifically. How are they handling, especially the seniors, where this type of season, um, it really can mess, with their potentially their future and maybe getting a scholarship, or do they share that type of concern with you, or how do y'all handle that?
Yeah, I've talked to a few coaches about this, and this actually went back to last year when this all kind of flipped on us. Was that the gratitude
Mm-hmm.
of having a season, and how grateful you could be to having a season. And I know all of the coaches, for those players that lost seasons, there was a way to flip kind of the mindset to it where, all right, well, here's your opportunity to get stronger without the risk of injury, and develop some of those skills that we normally wouldn't. I remember the kid across the street from me. He was kind of bummed out, and he'd never played wall ball before.
Oh, wow!
Bouncing the ball off the.
Yeah.
He had never played wall ball before. Because it's very much summer teams and all of those things. Yeah. So those were little things that a lot of players were able to kind of like learn. It's almost like learning the fundamentals, because travel ball is its own monster in itself.
Oh, yeah.
Where they the skills, building skills and fundamentals sometimes gets pushed aside. So, and I think a lot of kids found that they understand how important the game is to them.
Okay. Yeah.
Like when you lose something, you some were like, all right, I'm out. And
right.
But then others were kind of like, I miss having teammates around. And we some of the teams I work with is we focused on gratitude first. Like, how great is it to be outside when it's 27 degrees with your teammates, where, last year you barely could get out of your house.
Well, and even to that, they're usually in sports, one or two things happens to where you lose your sport, right? Mm-hmm. Which is you get cut, and that doesn't matter what level you're at, right? Mm-hmm. And or an injury.
Yeah.
And both of those are very, very difficult, and both of those leave a void that you can't answer, right? And I know that that in talking with a lot of mental performance coaches, the whole E plus R equals O type of mentality. I love what you said a little while ago about kind of being present and in the moment and learning how to deal with that. But I would think that having an opportunity like missing a season maybe creates a different type of learning experience or teaching experience for you when you know that they're going to have another opportunity. It's just how do we mentally deal with that today?
Yeah, they're dealing with during that pause. You encourage the athletes. You got to stay in shape, work on these skills, but a lot of them had to become very self-reliant as far as the recruiting process, where they weren't getting to the summer ball tournaments and the coaches were coming to see them. They were actually having to reach out to the college coaches. And I think that kind of gave them a little bit of more ownership in their recruiting process.
Yeah.
And you get I contacted this coach. They said they weren't interested. Okay. so move on to the next one. And,
right.
And just that part, because a lot of times kids are only recruited, like they only know the one part of the recruiting. This coach saw me and they came to talk to me. They sent me a letter, as opposed to what it used to be years ago. You had to reach out to the coaches and talk to them. And they wanted you to come up and just shake their hand and introduce yourself. And they wanted to see that they were getting a young man or a young woman that was responsible and caring and committed. So I think it kind of put the onus back on that self-reliance, which is good.
Great. Oh, it's great. And again, it helps build that gratitude that, oh my gosh, this is a real opportunity. And I think a lot of, especially heavily recruited kids, don't realize that opportunities are few and far between. Most college athletes don't have 20, 30, 40 offers from big schools. Most of them, to your point, got seen at the right time by the right person at one school. And they're like, you know what? I like what Sean O'Neill is putting on the field. Let's bring him in. So I think having them take a little more ownership is great. I think it helps out tremendously.
Yep.
So Sean, talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about the teams you are working with. Before we started the call, you had mentioned that you're working with some travel teams right now, even at a younger age, which I love to hear. I was sharing with you, I just got done with a 13U tournament about an hour and a half ago, prior to recording this. And the challenges that we get to see. So I'll share, we were down by 10 runs in our first game in a win or advance, Sunday. And, we had a little team meeting and like, hey man, all it takes is one, just be the one spark. And the next thing you know, we scored 11 runs.
Wow.
Yeah. To a walk off triple, scored the tying run from first in the bottom of the inning to advance us. But it was such an interesting thing to watch. The body language and how momentum played a role for both teams. Because even when our team was down by 4 runs, you could feel it in the dugout that absolutely everyone knew we were going to win. And you could watch it out there, and they absolutely knew they were hanging on by a thread and they were probably going to lose. And it's just interesting to hear that you have an opportunity to work with kids at a young age right now. Can you share a little bit about what's going on with that?
Yeah, so I actually haven't met with them yet, but I've been talking with the people that run their programs, and that's exactly what we were kind of focusing on, the being present. Win this pitch, win this at bat, win this inning. Like we've all been in those games where you're down by 10, and it's you can't. There is no 10-run home run.
Right.
You have to just focus on what you control and win the pitch, win the inning. All of those little cues to them. That was cool to hear that. And then you talk about the body language and the kids being confident, knowing this isn't over, and the other group, right, kind of going, I'm not too confident. And those are all things that I think with mental performance we can help kids with. It's we play the game. We don't just go by the paper.
Right.
This is the better team, so they automatically won in advance.
Right. That's how you play.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things that we can really focus on with the younger kids. The other kind of part that I wanted to meet with the coaches and the parents first, because no matter what we teach, that's going to be a couple of minutes. to an hour. But when they go home, if they're hearing the complete opposite and they're getting that stronger message, that's kind of where I wanted to focus first. I wanted to talk to the adults, because I'm sure in that game today, when you guys were down 10-0, there were parents in the stands going, our coach sucks. The team sucks. Why am I giving up my Sunday?
Right. That's funny.
Johnny, how did you strike out?
Yeah. What happened? What's going on? We got to fix this. We got to fix that. And, there were plenty of teachable moments for sure, even though you win the game. But, we certainly let them kind of ride the wave for a little bit. Right. So, hey, John, I got a question for you. Can you remember a game like that where you all of a sudden are on either side of it, and even though you either are up or down, and you're like, oh, this is ours, or oh dear God, find an out somewhere. I don't care if it pops up out of the second base, but just get me an out.
Yeah, we talked about this recently, Brandon, you and I, about this when we played Florida State, and how, the first time we were down there that you and I were playing them, we were up by a run going into the ninth, and we started scoreboard watching a little bit. I mean, I can remember the dugout being very much about, only a few more outs, or you started thinking, okay, 6 more outs or whatever, instead of let's just keep, focused on the process. Let's just keep winning pitches, let's keep doing all those things. Next thing you know, Florida State comes back in the bottom of the ninth, couple bunts, and then they get a little bit of a rally. They score 2 runs in the bottom half and end up winning the game. And it was so interesting because I remember us being cognizant of that as a team, to the point that the next year when we went down there, I remember having this discussion where we were all basically saying, hey, if we are in that same situation, we're focused on just winning the next pitch. We're focused on just kind of, and wouldn't you know it, I mean, the next year we shut them out 3-0 at their place. So, I mean, it's definitely one of those things. And Sean, you brought up something there with the parents that I really want people to understand, or to, as they're listening to this, write down. Parents are the first mental coaches that their kids will have. And you've got a really key responsibility to be somebody who can help that individual develop the ability. If you do nothing else as a parent, now I really want people to listen to this. If you do nothing else as a parent, help your kid develop the ability to self-assess. Help them to, and just, even if it's at the end of the day, you just ask them, hey, Sean, hey, Brandon, how was your day today? Tell me about some of the things that happened in your day. And let them talk to you about decisions that they made. Let them talk to you about how they responded to certain events that happened to them. What were you thinking? How'd that make you feel? What did, why did you make that decision? I'm just curious, get to know why their thought process on things, because that's going to give you an opportunity, one, to teach them how to assess, because they have to, in order to debrief their day with you, they have to be able to assess how things went. But then secondly, is you asking the right questions in that situation. You can kind of start to unpack maybe why they acted a certain way or they responded a certain way. And then that's an opportunity for you to parent and help them get through some of that, some of those situations, and be better at handling, whatever the situation is in the future.
Absolutely. With my own kids, they're in elementary school, and I always said, I don't want to be the dad that says, how was your day? Because you just get the good. So I'll ask them a question like, how did you help someone today? Or did you see someone else help someone today? Or tell me 3 things that you learned today that were neat to you. And it leads to good conversations. And I think, like you said, that's self-assessment, where they're becoming self-reliant. They're seeing the impact they have and other people have in their world.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me shift gears with you here for a second and talk about something I heard, because I want to get your perspective on this. We've taken a fair amount of your time up, and I appreciate you doing that. But I want to shift gears and get both your perspective on this and Brandon's perspective on this. So I was listening to a podcast today as I was driving home from a trip over in West Virginia, and I heard Lanny Basham. It was an interview with Lanny Basham, who's was an Olympic gold medalist in 1976 in Montreal. But he's also the author of a book called With Winning in Mind, and it's a really, really good book that I've heard some people talk about. But I had started reading this book a while back, and it's one of those that I put it down. But after listening to this interview, I'm going to definitely be picking it back up. But he talks in this interview today about 3 levels of participation. He said, I believe there's 3. He's a mental performance coach as well. Works with golfers and Olympic athletes, all of these things. But he said in this interview, there's 3 levels of participation. The first one is when you're just interested. You're playing it because you're just interested in the sport. The second one is when you're training to compete. That's when you're committed. You're training, you want to be competitive at it. The third one is when you're training to win. You're passionate about it. When you reach a level of participation where you're training to win at whatever it is that you're doing, that is passion. And he was saying on there, competitive people, when they come up against passionate people, will lose a lot. No matter how competitive you are, that passionate person, that person who is the same person who looks at practice as something they get to do and not something they have to do, right? It's not a chore to them, because they would much rather, they would much rather put in that time and work because they're that committed to wanting to win. I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that, and I'll share my thoughts here in a second.
Yeah, you're like describing mastery. That's one of those really neat things, that what separates the people that are good and then the people that are great, and then that next level of mastery in whether it's a sport or a job. And I think with good and great, people have this idea of an endpoint. Like, if I get here, that's it. But people with mastery in their mind, it never stops. There is no endpoint. They just keep going and going. Actually, you asked me about a quote today, and I'm reading George Leonard's book on mastery, and he wrote this: to love the plateau is to love what's most essential and enduring in your life. It's not always going to be this, those people that just, when they're kind of in that plateau, but they're still in love with what they're doing because they know it's going to get them to that next level. I think that's awesome. If you ever get around like elite athletes, I'm fortunate enough. A friend of mine is a Tour de France winner, has a yellow jersey and everything, and just sees the world in a completely different way. And it's fascinating.
Yeah. Brandon?
I think it's a very interesting question, and I believe what's interesting about it is this: that we as coaches, as parents, you have to provide some guidance at some point in time, right? For these things. And there are seasons, both from an emotional standpoint, but also truly seasons where they may or may not be interested in that sport. But I think it's where you may see that there's something to that, but you have to find a way to make it fun, to make it interesting, to maybe not force it. I see that a lot with parents forcing stuff. Sean, you brought it up. I mean, the mental game for what you're talking about with those three scenarios is so critical because, like you mentioned earlier, Sean, if a parent is yelling from the stand, if a parent is showing frustration, if any of that happens, it is the biggest wet blanket on what could potentially be a passion, which may lead to mastery, that there is. And I think for most kids that, or athletes or professionals that reach that level of mastery, I think you find one of two. Well, you probably find several common threads. One is they have extremely supportive ecosystem around them, right? And that doesn't mean that you don't allow them to fail. It's actually the complete opposite of that. But you love them and support them even through that failure and teach them that it's an opportunity to learn. I think the other thing with that, John, is it could be the complete opposite, to where they are negatively motivated and they hate to lose more than they love to win. And those negative thoughts, because it may be what they grew up with, they take that, oh yeah, well, I'll show you mentality. And I think it's really interesting, but I don't know that you get to any of those without certain influences in your life. I don't know that you can reach greatness alone, I guess is my point.
So here's one thing that struck me about this was when he's unpacking the 3 levels of participation was those, how often I see, and Sean, you've seen this, I'm sure, as both a teacher and as a coach. Brandon, I know you've seen this as a coach of young kids, especially, is there are a lot of fathers and mothers out there who want to be the motor for their children. They are the ones who are passionate about it. They are the ones who are committed to it. The kid is just in level 1. They're just interested in it. They just want to play because their friends are playing and they're out there playing or whatever. And I really believe as parents, I feel like we're doing a parent show now, but it's good. But I really do believe that we need to be aware, or parents need to be aware, when you are the one who is becoming the motor and that your kid is not the one. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. I have had experience where I've found myself when my kids were younger at times being like, hey, you should go out and shoot, get extra shots up. You should go out and throw. You should go out and get extra swings, whatever sport they were playing. I was the one telling them, you should go do this, you should go do that, or whatever. The reality of it is, if they wanted to do that, they would be out doing it, number one. But they also, now, I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a difference between guiding a child, a young athlete, and saying, hey, this is the secret to reaching certain goals if you have them. But we all know, and we've seen it firsthand, where it sometimes goes beyond that, where it's like the parent is the one who's constantly saying, hey, you need to go do this, you need to go do that. And I got news for those parents. If you find yourself doing that, or you know somebody who's doing it, is when these are the same kids that are good enough, they end up getting recruited, they end up going away to college or whatever, but they're also the ones that after a semester at that school, they come back. And the reason they come back and they never go back to school or they never go back to that sport is because they left their motor at home. If you end up becoming that motor, that engine for your child to play whatever sport it is that they're playing, when they leave, you either got to go with them and move in with them in the dorm room or whatever.
They'd love that.
Yeah, or just be prepared that they're going to, at some point, be like, you know what, I don't like this sport. So that was what I was really thinking about there with that training to compete versus training to win, is how many times, and Sean, it was something when you're talking about having been a high school coach and then a college coach or whatever. I know in my own experience, a lot of times what you find when you make that transition back into high school is there's lots of kids on those high school teams. Brandon was a high school baseball coach as well, where you realize pretty early on, not every one of these kids wants to go play college baseball. So I can't coach them all the same way. Some of them I can go to baseball 201 with, or base running 201 or hitting 201 or whatever. But most of them, I got to just kind of keep it at that surface level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Sean, let me ask you this question as we're kind of wrapping up. It's become the go-to question. Brandon knows where I'm probably going with this is, so I know that you're a sponge for this stuff. I mean, you're what I would call a lifelong learner. You're not, I mean, that was what I think, it's that law of attraction with me getting to know you a little bit more. And as we continue to talk is I know you're always reading, you're always talking to people, listening to podcasts, stuff like that. What's the last thing that you heard that made you think differently about something?
Yeah, it's a great question, because every time I listen to your guys' podcast, an Amazon order goes out the next day for a book that you talked about. It is like I have a stack of books right next to me right now. This is my summer reading. And I even tell my students, I go, I read every night, and they're like, what? I go, I don't even watch TV. There's not much there. There is one thing that I picked up actually in an email. I don't know if you know who Sims Weath is. Mm-mm. He's he teaches people how to speak in public. So he kind of, and that's one of the things I've always been kind of fascinated about those great storytellers. Like we know Dr. Gilbert on the Success Hotline. He's a great storyteller. Yeah. And Mark Lissini, who you had on a couple of weeks ago, he's another great storyteller. So I'm always fascinated about that. Like, how do you become a great storyteller? And every couple of weeks you're on the mailing list and they send you something. And this is something that in mental performance, I was like, you know what? I got to remember that. So it's a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. So a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. If we kind of try to get too much out there, we're going to lose them.
Yep.
So we got to take it back and kind of simplify it, small little chunks, as Kane would say. Do a little, a lot.
Right. No, I think that's an excellent point, and that's a great one to end on, because it is something that we're always mindful of on this show. Brandon and I talk about this quite a lot. Is just the idea of let's not try to pack in too much into any one show, because otherwise it can be, very overwhelming for the listener. So I want to thank you for taking the time to do this. I know this Absolutely. Has been on our radar for a long time, as you and I have talked about this to try to get you on the show. I apologize if when we end up playing this episode, there's lots of audio issues. I have been having computer issues the whole entire thing, but I know Brandon and Sean picked up. So if you all hear when you're listening to this show, there's big gaps where did John, what happened to him? Which a lot of you are probably like, thank the Lord that happened. But
that's perfect for the theme of what it's like educating in a remote.
Yes, that's a great point.
Absolutely.
I would love to say I did that intentionally, because it's definitely one of those things that's a great theme. But we're going to listen back to this thing, and I know that all the listeners are going to be able to get a lot of good stuff. And why we wanted to have you on is because you are facing the challenges out there right now, and you're having to practice E plus R equals O and all these things on a daily basis, and just making that adjustment, every single day. And I will say this on a personal note, I really do applaud you all that are in education, and thank you for what you all are doing, because this has not been the normal year in any regards whatsoever, but you guys keep showing up, and I think that should be applauded.
It's amazing.
So thanks for everything you're doing, Sean. I appreciate you both as a person and as an educator.
And thank you guys for doing this podcast, because it gets such an amazing amount of information out to people. That's really needed. As Mark Lissini said, building the wolf pack, and you guys are definitely right at the forefront. You're right there building it. So I was actually talking about your podcast to a hockey goalie the other day.
Nice.
So it's great. You give me a lot of good stuff to think about, which I really appreciate.
Thanks,
fantastic,
Sean.
Man. Well, listen, I can't thank you enough, and we'll talk, I'm sure, very, very soon. But thanks again for coming on.
Sounds good.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.